Now let us hear Diane, the third member of the Casablanca group, and then I will open to you.
Thank you. Well, I've got several hard acts to follow, I think. So I just wanted to share with you some of the key points from the last section of our paper towards an equitable, just and sustainable development. And the first thing that came out of our deliberations was a concern that as some countries started to come out of the crisis, governments were congratulating themselves on things are getting back to normal. So the first point we wanted to make is no back to normal, because the kind of normal we had before the crisis was not a normal that was a normal that would realize the Beijing Platform for Action, or that would eliminate poverty, or that would even fulfill the MDGs. So no back to normal is the first point we wanted to make in the final section of the paper. And then, so what do we want instead of back to normal, forward to what? 7 points I want to share with you, one for every day of the week. So maybe we could ask governments to start, on Sunday addressing the first and work through to the end of the week. The first one that has already been mentioned, I think, by Devaki and Nafis, growth that bubbles up rather than trickles down. And growth that bubbles up by building on experiences of women's small-scale production for local economies, growth that's led by wages and not by profits, food economies that are led by women farmers. Just because the financial crisis may be diminishing in many parts of the world doesn't mean the food crisis is solved. So food economies led by women farmers, industry and manufacturing led by the needs of poor women. We wanted to think about what kinds of goods and services do we want created in this new world. We've had too much development, we thought, that's led by a focus on private consumption for fleeting desires. And the kind of things that women need for their everyday lives, water, decent transport systems, decent housing systems, get neglected. So no more glitzy shopping malls, decent housing. No more 5-lane highways for Mercedes-Benzes. Let's have decent public transport systems. And within this growth that bubbles up and trickles down, emphasizing again a point we have emphasized but still always have to emphasize, to recognize, reduce and redistribute the unpaid work that women do, the unpaid work that has been intensified in the crisis as women have tried to provide that safety net for their families. So all of growth that bubbles up rather than trickles down. Second, socially useful banking and finance at macro as well as micro levels. Women have got a lot of experience with socially useful finance at the micro level. Now we need to scale that up. We need to make sure that commercial banks, that the guys on Wall Street, that Goldman Sachs, that central banks stop the kind of banking they have been doing and create socially useful banking that puts money at the service of people rather than the other way round. We think here there's a lot that can be learned from women's experience with finance. Third point, just and democratic public finance. And here there's a lot of experience that women have had around the world on working on gender-responsive budgeting, and UNDP and IDRC have been among the organisations supporting this in all regions of the world where we can all learn from one another. But here it's really important that we build on the work that's already done, so that work on gender-responsive budgeting can engage with the Minister of Finance on the macroeconomic questions, can challenge when we're told in many countries in part of the world that I come from, in Europe, and this is both Western Europe and Eastern Europe, sorry, you have no alternative now but to cut your public expenditure. And what began as a private financial crisis, the problem in the banking sector gets transformed into a crisis of the public finances. So we need to make sure women working on gender-responsive budgeting can engage with that kind of argument and challenge it. Socially responsible markets and fair trade. Markets are going to be an important aspect of any future that we want to build. But they have to be fair markets that balance competition with cooperation. And again, women's organisations have got experience of trying to build from the grassroots up fair marketing systems built on cooperation. And also, women's NGOs have been among those challenging the way that international trade agreements are currently negotiated and implemented. So we need to bring that knowledge to the table. One of the things we need to do is to transfer the understanding we have in our work on human rights about non-discrimination, where non-discrimination allows for affirmative action, allows for temporary special measures to redress past inequalities, to bring that understanding of non-discrimination into international trade negotiations, which have a totally different understanding of non-discrimination and don't allow for any temporary special measures for poorer countries to develop their industry before they trade on the same terms as richer countries. Support for equitable property rights. Number 5, support for equitable property rights. And we've heard from the minister from Nicaragua about the work going on in Nicaragua on equitable property rights. I think we need support for a whole variety of forms of ownership. Individual title to land, but also collective forms of ownership and management, cooperatives, employee-owned enterprises, municipally owned enterprises, and local committees for the management of natural resources. And women have been working in all these kinds of areas to try and make sure their voice is heard, and that needs to be strengthened. And building organisations of smaller scale owners of businesses so that their voice gets heard, as well as the multinationals in discussions on industrial policy. Number 6. Realising economic and social rights should be at the forefront of economic policy. Finance ministers don't think that their job is about realising economic and social rights. And if you talk to them about human rights, they direct you down the corridor to the Ministry of Justice. Maybe it's their responsibility. So we have to get ministers of finance. The whole government has an obligation for the realisation of human rights. And I think we, as women's organisations, have to learn to use the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, as well as CEDAW, and to make sure that ministers of finance think about their human rights obligations in the design of their economic policies. I think we have shown in the last 15 or more years that in the case of violence against women, global mobilization can help new understandings of human rights and progress to be made in realizing of human rights. I think we need a similar mobilization to hold governments account in respecting, promoting and fulfilling economic and social rights. And the final point that came out of our discussions that I'd like to mention is one that Devaki and Nafis have already, I think, mentioned: reforms in economic reasoning. It was old-style economic reasoning that underpinned the kind of financial strategies that generated this crisis. Now we have an opportunity, I think, to challenge that and to bring in reforms in economic reasoning. Reforms in economic reasoning that build on the work of feminist scholars and make sure that there's a holistic approach to economic analysis that takes into account the unpaid economy as well as the paid economy. If we can get all of these 7 points, even one of these 7 points, but ideally all of these 7 points on the agendas of governance, then I think we felt in our group we had a chance of creating a much more fruitful environment in economic terms for the realization of the aspirations of the Beijing Platform for Action. And we hope that women around the world will join with us and will make coalitions with men around the world who are also concerned with the limitations of the current paradigms of economies that we have.